Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Picture this. You claim the exact same throne as your cousin. You write them letters for literally 30 years. You send them gifts, you write all about your mutual love and respect, but you never, not once, actually meet them face to face. No way, right? Well, that is the staggering reality of Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots. We're talking about two incredibly powerful women sharing one island, locked in what has got to be the most dramatic royal relationship in history. I mean, it's a relationship that culminated in 19 years of imprisonment and ultimately a very bloody execution.
And you really couldn't ask for a starker contrast between these two cousins. On the one hand, you have Elizabeth. She's watchful, highly intelligent, fiercely Protestant, and deeply, deeply English. On the other hand, you've got Mary, charming, glamorous, devoutly Catholic, and Scottish, but raised with this very romanticized worldview. You know, these weren't just quirky personality differences. These were massive, profound political and religious divides. It completely set the stage for an epic, high-stakes collision.
So, to really understand how this collision actually happened, we have to look at where Mary started. Let's move into Section 1, A Stranger in Scotland Returned to Chaos. We're going to see how her life was shaped by rapid, completely uncontrollable shifts in power right from the literal moment she was born.
Because Mary's early years, absolute sheer chaos. She wasn't just born royal, she became Queen of Scotland when she was a mere 6 days old. 6 days! That was after her father, King James V, died. And because of these brutal English raids trying to force a marriage alliance, she was shipped off to safety in France at just 5 years old. She actually grew up in the most glamorous court in all of Europe, married the French heir at 15, and briefly became queen of both France and Scotland. Talk about a resume. But then, disaster strikes. Her teenage husband dies of an ear infection, so by age 18, Mary was a widow. She had no role left for her in France whatsoever. She had to go home.
But here's the thing. The Scotland she returned to in 1561 was barely recognizable. It was now this fiercely Protestant country, and she was a young Catholic queen. So the crucial takeaway here is the incredibly hostile environment waiting for her. John Knox, he was the powerful leader of the Scottish Reformation. He publicly declared that a woman ruling a realm was, quote, repugnant to nature, unquote. He openly, aggressively hated the idea of female Catholic rule. And this was the powder keg Mary walked directly into.
She tried her best to be tolerant, keeping her Catholic faith private, but honestly, the political situation was just impossible. She desperately needed a husband to secure her position. And, well, that brings us to Section 2, Murder and Abdication, Disastrous Choices. Let's look at how a series of, frankly, terrible personal decisions literally blows her reign apart.
Right, so in 1565, Mary makes a fatal choice. She marries her English cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Now, on paper, sure, it looked okay, but Darnley very quickly revealed himself to be vain, drunken, weak, and just insanely jealous. He demanded to be made King of Scotland, and when Mary rightfully refused, the marriage turned incredibly dark. In March 1566, Darnley actually led a group of Protestant lords right into Mary's private dining chamber. She was 6 months pregnant at the time, and they brutally stabbed her Italian secretary, David Rizzio, to death right in front of her. As you can imagine, she never forgave Darnley for this horrific betrayal. Which leads us to a sequence of events that honestly plays out exactly like a true crime thriller. By early 1567, Darnley was recovering from an illness at a house called Kirk of Field. Well, one night in February, the house was just blown to pieces by gunpowder. Boom. But get this, Darnley wasn't killed in the blast. No, his body was found out in the garden, strangled. The prime suspect? A Scottish lord named the Earl of Bothwell. Now, Bothwell was acquitted in a wildly suspicious rushed trial. And then, shockingly, just 3 months after her husband's murder, Mary actually marries Bothwell. I mean, to her people, it looked 100% like the Queen had just married her husband's killer.
As you'd expect, this catastrophic PR nightmare threw Scotland into absolute uproar. The Protestant lords immediately raised an army against her. Mary was captured, she was imprisoned on an island, and while she was locked up there, she miscarried Bothwell's twins. It's just tragic. The Scottish lords then forced her to abdicate in favor of her 1-year-old son, James. And though she actually managed this daring escape and raised one last army, she was defeated again. With literally nowhere else to turn, Mary fled across the border into England, throwing herself entirely on the mercy of her cousin, Elizabeth. And seeking refuge with Elizabeth? Yeah, that was without a doubt the worst decision she ever made. This marks the beginning of Section 3, 19 years a prisoner, Elizabeth's captive. This is where we see Mary transform from a reigning monarch on the run into a very high-profile prisoner.
19. That is the agonizing number of years Mary spent as Elizabeth's prisoner. You see, Elizabeth's response to Mary showing up in England was just sheer caution. She didn't help her, but she didn't send her back to be killed either. Instead, she just locked her away, moving her between various gloomy English castles. Now, Mary was given staff and some comforts, sure, but she was never, ever free. Elizabeth basically kept her alive primarily because she feared the precedent of one queen killing another. Plus, Mary's son, James, was now ruling Scotland, and Elizabeth really needed him on her side.
But keeping Mary alive created a massive, glaring security threat, because Catholic plots continually swirled around Mary during those 19 years. You've got the Ridolfi, Throckmorton, and Parry plots, and every single time conspirators used Mary's name as a rallying cry to overthrow the Protestant Elizabeth and install Catholic Mary right there on the English throne.
Eventually, Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, just had enough. And he engineered a brilliant, downright ruthless trap around the final conspiracy, the Babington Plot of 1586. Walsingham actually allowed Mary's correspondence to flow through a secret channel, but the whole time he knew he was intercepting and reading every single letter. He just waited patiently until Mary finally put pen to paper and explicitly approved the assassination of Queen Elizabeth. And once he had that written proof, the trap snapped shut.
Mary was tried, found guilty, and Elizabeth, after a ton of agonizing, by the way, finally signed the death warrant. On the morning of February 8, 1587, at Fotheringhay Castle, the 44-year-old Mary climbed the scaffold. And this brings us to a truly chilling detail. She was her own theater director right to the very end. She arrived wearing this somber black gown, but as she prepared for the executioner, her ladies removed it to reveal a deep, bright red petticoat underneath, because red was the color of martyrdom in the Catholic Church. This was her final, defiant political statement to the entire world. Her famous last words, "In my end is my beginning," perfectly echo the deep conviction she had about her own legacy. And guys, the execution itself was gruesome. The executioner's first axe blow actually missed her neck. The second cut through, but it took a third blow to finally finish the job. And when the executioner lifted her head to show the crowd, her wig fell off, revealing the short, gray hair of a woman who had spent nearly 2 decades wasting away in captivity.
Now, you might think the story just ends right there, with Elizabeth totally victorious and Mary dead. But let's look at Section 4, the ultimate historical irony: who really won? Because if there's one thing history loves, it's a good twist.
It really begs the question, when we look back at this bitter 30-year rivalry, so who actually won? On the surface, Elizabeth kept her throne and her life, while Mary lost both. But the long game tells a very, very different story.
See, Elizabeth never married, and she died childless 16 years later, in 1603, meaning the only person with a legitimate claim to inherit the English throne was Mary's son, James VI of Scotland. He swoops in and becomes King James I of England. And you know what one of his very first acts was? He moved his executed mother's body into Westminster Abbey, directly opposite the tomb of Elizabeth. So these two cousins who literally never met in life now lie just meters apart. And James made absolutely sure his mother's tomb was slightly larger and grander. He gave his mom the final royal word. Which brings us to the profound reality of today. Because Elizabeth left no heir, the cousin she imprisoned and executed became the mother of the modern monarchy. Every single British monarch from 1603 right down to today, including King Charles III, is a direct descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots, not Elizabeth. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this to ponder. Elizabeth may have won the battle for the island, but didn't Mary, Queen of Scots, ultimately win the crown?